Welcome back to the WPPS Podcast, where we bring you all the proof you need, quite literally. I hope you're enjoying all the episodes till now, and if you have any other guest in mind, please do let us know in the comments below. I'm your host Anushka Kalantri, and today, as usual, we are diving into the grain that's being most misunderstood these days, wheat. While diet trends may have made us question it, science and India's food heritage continue to remind us that wheat, when consumed mindfully, is still one of the most balanced and beneficial grains we can have. Joining me today is someone who's reshaping how India eats its breakfast, Mr. Aditya Bagri, Group Director at Bagrry's India. Under his leadership, Bagrry's has become one of India's most trusted homegrown names in health foods, a pioneer in clean label, high fiber cereals, with innovation rooted right here in Indian wheat. In this episode, we talk about myths around wheat, what really goes into your morning cereal, and how India's favorite grain is being reimagined for a healthier and more conscious future. So, let's get started and decode the real story behind wheat with Mr. Aditya Bagri. A very hearty welcome on the WPPS podcast, Aditya. How are you doing?
Thanks, Anushka. I'm doing great, and it's indeed a privilege to be here and be a part of the WPPS podcast.
Right, and we are so grateful to have you with us. And there's so much that we want to know about the whole brand of yours. And because we know that it's a household name, and not many know the philosophy behind it. And even I'm very curious today to know how wheat has become such a central ingredient in your innovation story.
Wheat pretty much has been a part of our journey since day one. Our family's been in the flour milling community for a fairly long period of time. We've been flour millers for generations. So being in the flour milling fraternity itself, wheat was pretty much the core of what we did. And essentially, the idea behind Bagrys also started from the fact that wheat was something that Mr. Mahatma Gandhi spoke about very highly. And he said that it's the most nutritive part of the wheat grain is actually wheat bran, which is thrown away by the processing that we do in our mills. And in fact, that needs to be preserved and retained. So my father, who started the brand, was actually passionate about the fact that Gandhi ji ne bola hai ki wheat healthy hai. So there must be something to it. So he started doing experiments with wheat bran and created a retail product around wheat bran. And the idea was to be, a consumer first product where we genuinely add value to consumers. And we saw the response that processing and retailing wheat bran did in the early 90s. And that gave him a lot of confidence to build a range of health food products. So, wheat has been a very core part of our health story, if I can say so.
Awesome. So, I mean, like you said, bran was something where
Yeah,
others take it as a waste product,
yeah,
but you have been using it, and that's a great way of actually utilizing the whole
yeah,
grain of wheat. But as we know, that gluten-free is trending right now everywhere, and
yeah.
it's become such a fad where everybody wants every product to be gluten-free. But Bagree still continues to involve wheat
Yes,
in your products.
yes.
So why do you believe that? Why does it deserve such a bigger space in India's health narrative? Because that's what your brand caters to.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question, Anushka. And I think there's often dissonance when it comes to wheat and health because on one side, there's the entire narrative of, going gluten free. And on the
Right.
other side, wheat intrinsically has lots of nutritive properties that one could, use. So I think if we break this narrative down, so the challenge of gluten intolerance and even, gluten allergy is
Yeah.
one key area and associated health issues. So if you're celiac, which is less than 1% of India's population, we would definitely not recommend wheat. If you're gluten intolerant, and that's something that'll show up in your dietary, behavior, then again, one would not recommend wheat. And it's also a question of how much. So the other challenge in India, what has happened is that our diets have predominantly been delivered by three macros, which is wheat, dairy, and sugar, and all three have been viewed with a fairly negative, connotation as of now. So I would say that wheat is not the enemy, but it's what part of the wheat do you use, which becomes core to your nutrition philosophy. So when we are making flour out of wheat, which is maida, you essentially scoop out the endosperm and remove the two healthiest parts of the wheat, which are the bran and the germ. The germ contains a great amount of micronutrients and oils, very tricky to stabilize in a unit. And the bran contains a fair amount of fiber and again tends to go rancid as soon as you process it. But from a nutritional perspective, they're two of the most nutritive parts of the grain. So if you actually end up looking at Gandhiji's philosophy, which drove us to build Bagrys, it was essentially the fact that you should use the whole grain. So if you're processing wheat in a traditional stone ground chucky, you end up getting a lot more of the bran and the endosperm, which essentially makes it far more balanced. And if you're using the refined wheat part, which could be maida, suji, several other applications out of it, and it's a very versatile grain. So there you end up using only a component of the wheat grain, which is essentially, the which is essentially the most unhealthy part of the grain, if I can say so. So I would highly recommend, going with whole grains and making sure that we're utilizing the whole grain in a comprehensive manner. It has applications in bakery, it has applications in packaged foods, it has applications at home. So one could really figure out what your nutritive requirements are. And wheat bran for us has been highly recommended by nutritionists. In fact, it's a ready-to-eat product, so you could add it to pretty much anything, and it adds to the fiber value. It's one of the easiest ways to help, manage weight for consumers as well.
Yeah, so awesome. I mean, since you were talking about weight management, that's one big elephant in the room where many
Yeah,
people think that consuming wheat is equal to weight gain.
yeah,
So again, I wanted to know about the whole wheat bran part of it, where you said that nutritionists also suggest that wheat bran is a
yeah.
healthier option and also can help in weight management. So can you help us with a little bit of nutritional science behind all of this as to in reference with gut health and also weight management?
Sure. Sure. So this is, weight management, in theory is pure mathematics, right? Like it's the amount of, calories that you take in versus the amount of calories that your body burns out. And the calorific deficit is what, causes you to gain or lose weight. Obviously, the type of calories could be from anything from a refined or a processed food, which could be, sugar or maida or, processed dairy. Technically, you could lose weight eating ice
Yeah.
creams and nothing else. But that's not obviously good for you because what you want is comprehensive nutrition. You want the requisite amount of protein and fiber and micronutrition to go inside. And I think that's where wheat comes in. So if you're having wheat in moderation, and by moderation, if instead of having refined wheat, you're having whole grains predominantly atta or stone ground wheat, that's great for you. And wheat bran works in an excellent manner because the core form of wheat has got two types of fibers, insoluble and soluble. And wheat is very high on insoluble fiber. And the insoluble fiber is actually great for weight management and for gut health for two reasons. That the fiber actually works like a broom. So when you have that fiber, it swells up in your intestines and it scrubs, everything off a lot faster. So food moves faster through your gut, giving less time for other calorific nutrients like fats and you know carbohydrates and starches to get absorbed. And it actually works as a broom to clean your digestive system. So it is highly recommended to have bran, both for digestive health as well as for weight management. And most of the fiber rich products in retail across the world have had wheat as a primary component.
Right.
Bran flakes have been a core part of a breakfast cereal, offering for several years, and the predominant fiber component has been wheat. So
Hmm.
in several cases, while we view wheat as an enemy because of gluten and celiac issues as well as the processed nature of the grain, I think if I look at the nutritional side, it has huge offerings in terms of wheat germ and wheat bran, which are the more nutritive parts of the grain. And when you have the whole grain, then you get all components of it, and that's exactly how nature intended it. That's how it should be consumed.
Awesome. I think that was a very nicely perspective that you've put forth, and a lot of people, even I, did not know about it. But like I know in our conversation, you had mentioned that you also for Bagrys, the cereals, you use wheat bran as one of the
Absolutely.
main ingredients, and like you mentioned, the health benefits of it. I'm still confused. Like, are there other people also who are into the other brands who are also into breakfast cereals? Do they also have the same ingredients, or is it that Bagrys is doing something different from them?
So again, very interesting question, Anushka, and I'll put that into timeline. So in India, we were one of the first brands to actually get into the space of breakfast cereals, and definitely the first in processing and packaging wheat bran for human consumers. Because
Right.
otherwise, wheat bran predominantly is cattle grade. So the process of actually making wheat bran fit for human consumption was developed by my father, and subsequently, it was a core ingredient for everything we make. So including say mueslis, where breakfast cereal has a mueslis is a mix of whole grain, nuts, honey, seeds. Wheat bran has been a central part of our ingredient story. So while we've been the forerunners in adding wheat bran to breakfast cereal, I think many other brands which started after us have followed suit. I think everyone's got their own journeys and nutrition philosophy, but having the finest ingredients from around the world, using fiber and having a high amount of fiber through ingredients such as wheat bran and oats has been a central part of the nutritional offering that we have, and the fact that we want to do something which is authentically clean label, no artificial ingredients, no additives that are bad for you, clinically well researched, extremely well processed in a very safe and in a state of the art hygienic manner, is something that's core to us, and that's pretty much the reason we've existed or grown over the years, because consumers have liked what we've had to sell.
Again, coming back to the same point where wheat bran is very nutritional, and it's been the main, like the hero ingredient for the cereals at Bagrys. But again, even though it is so famous or it has such amazing benefits, why is it not being talked about much, maybe through the nutritionists or the dietitians? Because somewhere that's like a part of wheat as we speak. But again, the wheat as whole grain is being villainized, and again, the
Yeah.
part of gluten which is being more highlighted than the good parts. So why do you
Yeah.
think that is happening?
I think, Anushka, if I break that down also, it's obviously um, wheat as a staple has a huge base in India for
Yeah.
consumption. So if I look at the volume, then it's the second largest, staple grain in India after rice. And um, the phenomena that we're talking about is more of urban health. And in urban health also, I think nutritional philosophies tend to be little cyclical. So, people find early results in dropping gluten, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that um, we consume an excess amount of the wheat grain, especially the processed wheat grain, because if you look at where all maida goes, it's actually surprising, right? Like it
Yeah.
goes into you know the obvious culprits like your cookies and cakes and all, but it also goes into infant nutrition. It also goes into uh, health food drinks. It also goes into products which are perceivably healthy but are actually not good for you. So we've always had that overload of refined wheat. Um, as a result, in refined wheat, obviously the gluten concentration as well as the starch concentration is higher. So it's had this bad repute. So um, when a dietitian or a nutritionist tells a consumer to drop wheat, it is an easy blanket feedback that one gives, because otherwise one would have to check for gluten allergy, one would have to check whether you're celiac, one would have to check whether there's inflammation happening. So the safer thing is to just drop wheat and give other high fiber
Mm.
alternatives. So I think from an urban phenomenon, it becomes an easier solve and easier explanation. And I think from a Bagri's perspective, what we're actually doing and what we have been doing over the years is a lot of nutritionists and outreach to the health and wellness community, explaining the benefits of fiber and wheat bran and the fact that it's really good for you. Sure, if you're celiac, if you've got dietary reasons to not consume wheat? Definitely don't. Most of the new age products that are being developed are not necessarily gluten free. Because the kind of processing, application, and versatility that the wheat grain offers is very hard to match. There are not many grains that can match it. Each grain, millet, or food has its strengths and weaknesses, and it's how we process it or blend it in our diets, that really matters.
That was a really nice answer that you've given, where everybody can consume everything, and of course, I think the balance and the proportion is the key to all
Yeah,
our, whatever we are
yeah,
consuming. We cannot, bad name one particular grain and then, just say that something's better for you or good for you. Something can be
yeah,
good, something can be bad. It's all on the individual
yeah.
perspective. But also as a brand, Bagrys is into, again, like wheat-based products as well, and also into oats and millets. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
So, because you have both the products on the shelf, I would still want to ask you, because there is a lot of unethical marketing that's going on, where you said oats again is naturally gluten free. It does not have gluten,
Mhm,
but promoting or marketing oats as gluten free is
mhm.
not correct, because it naturally does not
Yeah,
have gluten. So,
yeah.
as a brand, what is your perspective on this, and would you ever market, with such a strategy ever?
Okay. So, if there is a product which is certified gluten free, then we would market, it as gluten free because it obviously has that comfort for those consumers which are looking for gluten free products. Which doesn't mean that if a product has added gluten, we will call it out and say that this is bad for you necessarily, and which obviously comes from the balance perspective which we spoke about. But specifically, the oat grain is something that while it's naturally gluten free, and if you're not allergic to gluten, it's absolutely fine for you to consume. But oats around the world are grown on similar fields as wheat. And invariably, a trace, wheat grain finds its way in an oat product. So responsible brands, which includes us and large multinationals, have always steered clear of claiming gluten-free on an oats pack unless we've sourced the oats grain from genuinely certified, gluten-free farms. And obviously, I've seen that there's a lot of zeal and enthusiasm amongst the startup ecosystem to not follow that route. And every new age brand I see with oats has gluten-free labeled on it.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely risky. And there's a reason why large multinationals or global giants have not done this. And in fact, many of us have mentioned it on our websites as well that while oats is naturally gluten free, and if you want to follow a gluten free diet or a gluten light diet, please do consume oats, and it's absolutely good for you. But if you're celiac, then it's better to consume things which are certified gluten free. But oats is the other side of it. It's a very different grain from wheat. It's very high on fat. It is very high on soluble fiber. So the nutritive properties of oats are very different from wheat. The fiber in oats is more in the form of soluble fiber, which helps more with heart health. So it has weight management benefits because oats itself has slow release energy. But the fiber, which is the soluble fiber, is a fiber called beta glucan, which can actually help scrub cholesterol off your blood vessels. So essentially, that's the reason why it's considered good for heart health. And again, a great additive to your diet. And hence a combination of whole oats and whole wheat, which is what our mueslis offer, becomes a
Right.
great way of adding a lot of fiber into your diet in both those forms, as well as the right form of energy and grain-based proteins and so on. So I think the fact that you're having whole grains in general, and having the better part of the grain, um, that in a sense is where the conversation moves. And then again, it comes down to other metrics. People do measure glycemic index,
Yes.
which is another interesting nutritional phenomena, because
Mhm.
I could consume steel cut oats, which would be low glycemic index, but the macros such as the proteins or the fibers and even the micros such as the minerals and the vitamins would be the same. Or I could process it into instant oats where you just add hot water and the
Yeah.
product is ready. The macros and the micros would remain the same, but the glycemic index would shoot up. So a lot of the nutritional benefits that get passed on to a product also depend on how you process it. So highly refined maida versus stone ground atta. would have a different,
Mm.
nutritional connotation. Especially today in the era of e-commerce and quick commerce, we're seeing a surge in various, types of wheat. So suddenly, khapli flour has found
Yeah.
itself as one of the most fashionable forms of wheat. People are looking at, different forms of rice also, to consume. So I think for modern India and for a very health conscious India, processors and brands would also have to evolve. And while we're talking about the fact that there's a lot of negativity around wheat, there are new age brands selling khapli flour and new age forms of wheat as well. So we do have to understand that consumers tend to believe certain things from a certain perspective, and we have to make the right kind of noise to make sure that we're educating consumers in that direction.
On this note, would you like to give out any tip to our listeners or the consumers, listening to this podcast, where how can they choose a product? So even if it's supposed
Yeah.
to be gluten free, and if suppose it's a wheat based product, so how do you basically the comparison between a superfood buying
Yeah.
someone who's buying a superfood and someone who's buying a wheat based product?
Okay. So I think that could be fairly subjective, and it's actually something that should be reasonably personalized. So the first lens, and since we're talking from a allergic perspective, one should test and realize whether they're gluten allergic. If you're not, and if you're trying to actually just add this as a healthy part of your lifestyle, then you have to actually see what is the overall mix you're consuming. Are you having wheat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Or you swap, one of those meals with an alternative, superfood that could be a quinoa, that could even be rice, which is very easy to digest in most cases. And then the second part is actually reading the nutritional labels. That what are the
Yeah.
macros that are going into the product, as well as the trust that you have for the brand that you're buying. Because in many of these cases, it could be an established brand, it could be a new age brand, there could be a mix in terms of the kind of offerings you have. Um, then going beyond the label, because the label may not give you the refinement. So if there's atta, is it stone ground atta, it is, or is it whole wheat atta? Some interesting ways of finding that out is you can figure out if the fiber levels are high. So for example, in a parallel of brown rice, you've got two or three forms of brown rice. You've got you know um, big, regular brown rice, which will take 30 minutes to prepare. You'll notice that the fiber levels are much higher
I
than the quick cooking brown rice, which takes 10 or 15 minutes to prepare. So that's a cue for you. If you're willing to take that prep time up, then I'd rather choose the brown rice, which takes me 30 minutes to prepare but gives me a lot more fiber when I consume it.
Mm.
The other aspects is you could actually get superfoods as fortifiers. So our wheat bran works as a fortifier. You add with adding a few spoons of wheat bran to your chapati dough, and over a period of time you could go 50-50. And we recommend a gradual move up because your digestive system gets a kickstart every time you have wheat bran, and your body gets used to absorbing more fiber over a period of time. Similarly, you could complement it with seeds, you could complement it with quinoa, you could complement it with other grains. It depends on the type of fat. In fact, fat is a very essential component of making sure that the glycemic index is maintained.
Mm.
There's a reason why we have bread with butter, and the
Right.
reason is that if you have bread without butter, your blood sugar spike will be a lot higher. The
Mm.
fat that you coat onto the bread actually makes sure that the blood sugar doesn't spike as much. So even though that's a refined food example, it goes with the fact that we have ghee in our meals, because if you don't add the ghee, um, it'll actually cause a glycemic index spike, which will be much higher. So I think there are various aspects of nutrition and the balance of everything coming together, especially the fact that you have vegetables with your wheat and dal, which gives you
Yeah.
various forms of nutrition, is what really causes a win, from a health perspective or a dietary perspective. And it comes down to what your individual goals or requirements are. If you're aiming for weight management, if you're aiming for gain, you obviously want that in a vegetarian diet you get certain amounts of protein as well. So all of those aspects have to be looked at when you chart out your diets or your food menus. And wheat has a very intrinsic role to play. Gluten, if you're not allergic to it, which is 99% of us, is one of the best forms of vegetarian protein. In fact, in the West, we have high protein breakfast cereals which have been fortified with gluten as an additive. So
Oh,
Weetabix,
great.
which is a global cereal brand, launched a high protein Weetabix where the protein
Wow.
source was gluten.
Wow.
So, so while we are following certain Western fads
Yeah,
and moving away from gluten, brands in the West are viewing this from a different perspective and looking at it as a protein, additive. So it all comes down to what works for you, and from a brand perspective, how do you position it?
absolutely. I think this is a very well made point where we are getting influenced by the Western fads, but again, I think the right ones needs to come to India and we need to start getting influenced by the right ones. But on that note, when you were talking about the clean label part of it, where you said Bagrys is one of the brands where you want to like
Yeah,
clean label is your promise to the consumers. So what does and we also spoke about the nutritional. One of your tips was again reading the nutritional value content behind any product. So I just want to know how do you make sure that people can trust what's inside the cereal box? How transparent is Bagrys as a brand?
as far as reading the label is concerned, I think one has to look at the ingredients that go in, and it's a very simple form. It always follows the highest ingredient to the lowest ingredient. We try and make sure that we put out everything out there in the manner which is compliant with the FSSAI, declaring percentages wherever required, declaring the descending order hierarchy. We also try and make sure that it's in the language that is compliant. Sometimes, to give an example, many people get a little taken aback by numbers
Yeah.
or codes. Unfortunately, we have to give these codes as a part of the mandate, but not all numbers means it's a chemical going in. And we've been very particular about uh, the way the ingredients are processed. And I can give a few examples. We use an antioxidant called INS-307B, which is a mix of rosemary extract and tocopherols. Now, this is an antioxidant that philosophically we've been using for many years because we believe it's much better for you. Essentially, it's a natural form of vitamin E. It is far more expensive than other synthetic antioxidants, which are permissible by Food Safety Authority of India, but essentially may not be as clean label, such as BHA, which is INS 320. Now, both would read as E numbers on your label, but INS 320 is BHA, which is a petroleum derived synthetic antioxidant, which has been banned by countries such as Japan for the suspect of being a carcinogen and widely used by many other applications because the temperatures at which you could process would be a lot higher. Whereas we try and use a natural antioxidant, which is maybe 20x or 30x the price, but it is something that preserves or retains freshness in the product in a natural way, adding nutritive value, made out of soy, and it also means that we have to process our products at a much lower temperature, essentially leading us to lose less nutrition because the higher temperature you take into processing, the more nutritional loss is there. So we have to put our entire processing in that manner. And this is a nudge that we did, and essentially what we've seen is most breakfast cereals in India have moved away from this, antioxidant. But that's
Okay.
something that as Bagrys we started very early on.
Hmm.
And similarly, if I talk about say fruits, a lot of us see, fruit-based breakfast cereals and so on. Um, the kind of fruits that we put in our muesli are either naturally dried or freeze dried. Um, Whereas most of the fruits that go into breakfast cereal typically tend to be fruit candies, which are
Yeah.
actually 70% sugar and 30% fruit. And once you hard boil the fruit into a candy, any micronutrient is lost. Whereas if you look at a freeze dried fruit, you actually first freeze the fruit and then suck the moisture out of it. And that's the best way to preserve nutrition, especially micronutrition like vitamins and minerals, after having the fruit fresh. And it retains about 95% plus of the fruit's micro. And it's very expensive because a kilo of banana, for example, would give me only 100 grams of freeze dried banana.
Okay.
So if you're adding freeze dried ingredient from a rehydration perspective, we're actually adding a lot more fruit, even though
Hmm.
we're declaring the product on dry basis. And whereas if I look at some of the other players, they're adding 70% um, of an ingredient which is sugar. So if we add 1 gram of banana, it's actually the equivalent of 10 grams of banana. Whereas if someone adds banana candy of 1 gram, it's actually zero point 0.3 grams of banana. So that's the comparative if you do the math around it. And the zero point 0.3 grams of banana will not give you any nutrition because it's already processed at an ultra high temperature. So
Is this all mentioned again in the nutritional
So
content?
now these are nuances that go beyond the nutritional table. So
Okay.
then that's when we do back of the pack explanation. That's where we have to do outreach and explain that this is why our mueslis would be better, or this is what's good for us. And this is the positioning that we'd like to do with Bagrys. And similarly, if you're making a product, typical food processing mindset's always been that let's try and make a product that works for the consumer, that's tasty, that consumers would like, and that's absolutely right. I think when we design a product, we try and make sure that we look at what are our nutritional goals. The health aspect of it comes first,
Yeah.
then we put in all the ingredients, then we put the lens at, okay, does it taste good enough for a consumer to have? It should taste great. um, is it commercially viable? But once you go through the lens of putting that health aspect first, the outcome is that the end product that you get after various refinements and various filters still tends to be a much healthier alternative to what is available. And to give an example, one of the key innovations that we did was actually in the cornflake segment. So, as a philosophy, my father, who started the brand, said that I'll never sell regular cornflakes under the Bagrys brand because he'd actually started it. And then when he started doing research on cornflakes, he realized that it's very high the glycemic index. So he actually pulled cornflakes out of the market, especially at a time that cornflakes was the core offering in the breakfast cereal
Yeah.
category. He pulled the cornflakes back, and ever since then, he tried various iterations to actually make cornflakes healthy. And I remember that in 2011, we did a product called bran added cornflakes, where we coated cornflakes with wheat bran, and the intent was to add more fiber into the cornflake, and that didn't work because it tasted different, and consumers the bran actually separated once you put the milk inside. Then we attempted to blend cornflakes and oats and create a product in 2014, and again the intention was to actually create something that's genuinely better for consumers. And then I think this obsession stayed with him, so he kept on trying. He didn't give up on the fact that nahi mujhe एक healthy cornflakes offer करना है. So in 2016 we actually created a product where we managed to infuse fiber into a cornflake, and the fiber was a combination of prebiotic fibers as well as wheat fiber. So again, wheat came into the play, where we got fairly concentrated wheat fiber, and we actually injected it into a traditional cornflake. Now, India is a traditional cornflake market, and cornflakes can be made in two ways. One is using the whole corn and flaking it,
Yeah.
which is what the traditional cornflakes is, and the other form is extrusion, which you actually make a flour out of it and then you pop it into a flake. And the Indian market is more centered around the traditional cornflakes. So the fact that we managed to add fiber into a traditional cornflake, best to our knowledge, had not been done anywhere else in the world. So a very small breakfast company out of India in comparison to what the global positioning of breakfast is like, but a very relevant innovation that came because it was a category which was synonymous with breakfast cereals, and our intent was always that if we enter the space we have to do it right, and
Right.
that's the philosophy we followed with everything new we've done. We got into kids cereals, but kids cereals have been a concoction of maida and lots of sugar, and again additives such as BHA and artificial flavor and color. And we flipped that around when we launched our kids cereals. We realized that kids would want something that tastes the same because that's obviously very important. It's a big determinant, and as a parent, you are more stressed whether the kid's going
Yeah.
to eat it or not. So it has to taste great.
Please.
But we changed the base into a blend of oats, wheat, and rice. So wheat was again a central ingredient, very useful ingredient for expansion. But we used whole wheat. So we used whole wheat from our chakis and made sure that it's got more fiber. We added only natural, cocoa. We reduced the quantum of sugar. We made sure there's no artificial color or any color for that matter, and used only natural and nature identical flavors. So all in all, a much better tasting product, as well as a product which is nutritionally superior to the alternatives available in the market.
The kind of innovations that you've done around, the superfoods as well as including wheat and making it also nutritious, I think it is amazing and it's just fab whatever I've heard. The story is really inspiring, and I think other
Thank you.
brands should also work on these lines so that the end consumer benefits the most out of it. For cornflakes has been one of the major food that we've consumed as our breakfast, as part of our breakfast, and we've always, for the longest time, we've thought that it's really healthy. But today I think you've broken that myth, and it's actually a eye opener for all of us who's consuming cornflakes, that it's not that healthy as we supposedly think of it to be. So I think that's going to change the narrative of how we are consuming a lot of food. How would you convince the consumers that wheat based products are both delicious as well as nutritious?
So, I think the conflict of health versus taste has been quintessentially the oldest conflict for food brands, and especially health food brands, because while we're trying to deliver health, we have to win over taste, and that conflict, I think, is very honestly a healthy conflict. And one often feels that those two things can't correlate, and whatever is tasty is necessarily not healthy, and whatever is healthy is necessarily not tasty. And we found that that's honestly not true. If you can, look at that challenge and find a way to make whatever you are processing tasty as a prerequisite. It comes down to using the right ingredients. Wheat itself, like we mentioned, is a very versatile ingredient, so it blends in seamlessly with a lot of other things. For example, it blends in with other grains such as oats and rice very well when we use it, for various processes such as extrusion. When we make products such as muesli, which is where more um, versatility is on play, and one can create an infinite possibility of recipes. I think taste is also center stage. Eventually, that's the first, aspect from which we're going to be judged. So we do try and make sure that we make products which have great texture. So the mueslis that we typically make are crunchy in nature, are very, great in terms of having a palatability, and that also comes from the insight that Indians traditionally prefer cooked cereals. So if you have muesli in the West, you'll find that it's a lot more raw. And that comes from the fact that, there's a taste and a palate for raw grains. But in India, we've all grown up having cereal after cooking, especially given that the microbial environment in India is very different from the microbial environment in the West. And essentially, so every grain that we've consumed has largely been cooked. We seldom have uncooked grain. So if I give you, oats or wheat in the same form as which it's available in the West, you may not have palatability for it. So our first point of palatability is the texture and the mouthfeel. And we do try and make sure that our cereals have a lot of crunch, a lot of and good mouthfeel behind what goes in. The other part is the flavor. So while there is a lot of flavor options available to do it artificially, I think there's a way to do it naturally also. One can use good natural ingredients to blend in the flavor. Grains intrinsically have a great flavor. Oats has a very sweet palatability to it. The wheat grain has a slightly more nuttier palatability to it. Almonds and raisins add fair amount of flavor to a product, especially natural berries. So we use a lot of cranberries in our products. We use cocoa in some of our offerings. We use freeze dried fruits like we mentioned, and that adds a lot of flavor.
Yeah.
Even if we have to add visual appeal to a product, we'd rather use natural colors such as curcumin or beetroot rather than artificial colors. And if we have to add sweetness, it typically is in the form of unrefined sugar or honey. And especially in everything new we are doing, we are seldom adding refined sugar. There was a time that we were adding refined sugar, and some of our historic offerings would have it, but it's also the quantum of sugar that we would add. So we would add just the enough amount of sugar so that the taste is optimized and it does not impact your health. We also realize that India is a hot milk consuming nation. So what we've designed is to make sure that the breakfast cereal still stays tasty in hot milk. So the difference is that if you have cornflakes or cereal typically and add hot milk, it'll become a lump and you may not enjoy it as much.
Hmm.
And lots of brands had to re-engineer the way they think of the Indian market because they didn't fathom that India actually was a hot milk consuming nation. But when you look at mueslis and oats and porridge mixes, they work very well in warm milk. So we've developed products where, in most cases, they work well in warm and cold milk. Taste has been central in that journey. So if a product doesn't taste good, it'll probably not end up reaching the
Right.
consumer shelf because we know it'll not work.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge for our teams. It requires iteration, and but it's also something that once you get the balance right, is a winning formula, because that's exactly what consumers are looking for.
I think yes. So again, the part where it's delicious, very tasty, and healthy, I think that's the whole balance we all as consumers look
Yeah,
for, where whatever we're having is great on the palate and also is healthy for our whole
yeah.
lifestyle. I think that's a great, again, a great combination of things. And with all of this, what do you think? And with so many innovations that you've also told us, where you've been doing a lot of innovations around a lot of superfoods also and wheat based products as well. What do you think? How is wheat evolving in the next few decades in India, especially in the FMCG space? And do you think can it be repositioned as a modern day superfood with so many nutritional, benefits that
Yeah.
you've actually mentioned today?
So, Anushka, I think the the responsibility to reposition wheat, lies with the brands and the businesses which are selling wheat. It surely can be repositioned as a modern day superfood. And to give various examples, I've given the example of wheat bran,
Yeah,
and what we are doing. There are brands trying to sell, various forms of wheat, whether it's kapli wheat or sharbati wheat, from a taste standpoint. Those are getting center stage. There is an entire way of processing it also. Today certainly there's a boutique availability of sourdough bread.
right.
Now sourdough again uses wheat. It's the way we are fermenting and processing, the dough that's changing. So I think as we move the conversation away from refinement towards more of whole grains for sure, and the other elements of the wheat grain, it can be repositioned into a superfood. Intrinsically, the wheat grain has low amounts of fat, great quality of both protein and fiber and micronutrients in the germ. Um, it's now up to the brands to use the wheat grain responsibly. If we continue to use maida in an inherent, form of consumption and expect that that perception will change, that'll probably not help the narrative. But if you end up using more of whole grains, if you end up, using, atta in the right way, I think that'll definitely help. And I think the wheat positioning 2.0 has to be a far more evolved positioning that gluten might be a challenge for some of us. It's not a challenge for most of
Yeah.
us. And if we have it in moderation, then it's a great grain to have to your diet, and especially for a country which is vegetarian, and for a country where you do need a high amount of protein coming in from the grain as well, because all said and done we have a lot more carb than any other
Yeah.
country. So the whole grain does offer the fiber to balance that carb out. So I think there's a lot of work to be done by all stakeholders to make sure that the right conversation happens, and we're not here to dissuade consumers from going gluten free. Everyone's free to choose their own lifestyles, but at the end of the day, it's all about balance, because typically one tends to leave gluten, milk, sugar in entirety, and eventually it becomes a very unsustainable lifestyle for consumers to lead,
Right. I think
where you're
that's
not.
yeah, that's a fair point that you've made that again, it's our individual choices, but balance is the key. And
Yeah,
that's how we gotta move forward. And again, everybody, all the stakeholders are responsible for promoting it, also making things aware. And I think WPPS is one of such
absolutely.
platforms where we are doing so by promoting the right ways of consuming wheat.
Yeah.
So, moving into a little lighter segment where it's going to be like a quick answer, one-liner answer, where we call it wheat in a minute.
Okay.
So, I'm just going to say out a statement, and whatever comes to your mind, one thought, you can just let us
Sure.
know. All right. So, one wheat fact that surprises most people.
The fact that it has a ton of fiber, and the wheat bran is actually something that you need to lose weight. Most people just think of giving up wheat as the default for losing weight, whereas what you need to do is add a lot of wheat bran.
Wow, I love that. Your personal favorite wheat-based Bagrry product.
So we make these total bran wheat flakes, which are quite tasty, and they're made using whole wheat. So it's very easy to snack on, very versatile. So personally, I love the wheat flakes that we make.
Awesome. Got to try that. If you had to market wheat to the Gen Zs in one hashtag, what would that be?
Okay. Um, brand new energy.
Sorry?
Brand new energy.
Brand new energy. Okay. Hashtag brand new energy. Awesome.
Yeah.
A food myth you wish would disappear overnight.
Carbs are the enemy.
Awesome. I think that was they were really nice and candid answers that you've shared. Just on the concluding note, I would, if you could leave our listeners with one simple, science-backed piece of advice about including wheat in their diet, and how would that be?
So I think, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation as well, one should really assess, whether wheat is acceptable for them. And for most of us, it's a safe assumption to know that wheat is acceptable because in most cases we've grown up eating it. Uh, my feedback would be that try and incorporate it in certain parts of your day. Don't uh, overdose on wheat or the alternative staple, which tends to be rice. The balance is really the key, and try and remove the refinement of wheat and move towards the more whole grain approach. So you can switch your refined bread for whole wheat bread, not brown bread which is caramel colored, but whole wheat bread or
Yeah.
sardo, which is a whole wheat alternatives. You could use wheat as a base to blend other grains. So for example, if you're making a multi-grain chapati and you don't add wheat, your chapati is not going to fluff.
Hmm.
The wheat is what's giving it the starch and for it to fluff. As soon as you blend oats and wheat and other grains, then magic happens. The roti tastes just as good as what it would otherwise, but has all the aspects of a multi-grain offering. Do look at the fact that you can add wheat in the form of fiber. So wheat bran's a great additive. Experimenting with various forms of wheat is also great, but the simpler you keep it, the better. If you're having whole wheat chakki atta, incorporating that in your diets, great. If you're having pastas made out of wheat, and wheat is pretty much the only ingredient in pasta. If you can, swap refined pastas with whole wheat pastas, again, you're adding a lot more fiber and nutrition, back into your diet. Um, I think one should definitely remove the worry with wheat
Yeah.
and use it as a tool to make your overall nutrition better and as a base to add other healthy ingredients on top of it. Because it's one of the most versatile grains one can get. So you can blend wheat with pretty much anything. Um, the flip is to move from refined to unrefined and use the better parts of the grain. And I think that's what we're trying to do here at Bagrys, and that's what I think WPPS is also trying to educate. And I do sincerely believe that consumers, are already getting very aware. Today we have most information, at the drop of a chat GPT prompt or an AI prompt, and hence, demystifying myths is becoming a lot more easier.
Absolutely. I think it's a superb answer that you've given, and a lot of people, whoever will be watching, I think it's going to be a really great advice for all of them. And it's going to change the narrative, hopefully, for all the people listening today. I think it's been an insightful, nothing less than an insightful conversation today. And thank you so much for giving us such nuances into the
Yeah,
industry insights, and also everything that you put into the building the whole brand at Bagrys. I think you've
thank you.
given us a new lens to look at wheat in a very different perspective. So that's just awesome.
But thank you so much, Anushka, for having me here. It's indeed a privilege. Being from the family fraternity, I've seen the fraternity from a close lens growing up. I think to be a part of a WPPS podcast is pretty much life coming full circle because it's all been people we've admired and seen build the wheat milling fraternity, and to contribute in any form is truly a privilege here.
Thank you so much for that. And just on the concluding note, I just wanted to just say out loud to everybody who's listening today that From fiber to innovation, it's clear that the goodness of wheat goes far beyond than your chapatis on the plate. It's a reminder that it's the balance, not the fear. And the real ingredient is for the betterment of your health. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the WPPS channel for more such insightful conversations that break myths and bring to you expert backed proof that wheat is the grain that you need. Check out our social media handles linked in the description box below. And yes, that was the Wheat Product Promotion Society podcast for you. Until next time, remind yourself to stay curious, eat consciously, and give wheat the credit it truly deserves, because you'll never have to say tata to atta. This is Anushka Kalantri signing off. Thank you so much.